No problem. And again, thanks for having me. So, I got started in crypto reporting about 2 years ago, and it started off with the Ripple SEC case. We were doing a piece about it. I say a piece, it was more like an opus. We called it an opus because it was so long. We did a 10,000 word sort of expose on what was involved in bringing the lawsuit, who the key players were, and we published this in November of 2021. And that was kind of my first foray into, crypto and the regulatory side of things and how the two are so closely entwined. And for the last 2 years, it really has been such a struggle for obviously regulatory clarity, but, just that's really been the flow of the headlines. I mean, obviously, we talk about the Bitcoin price, we talk about Ethereum price, we talk about all crypto prices, especially in at Fox Business, we focus because we're sort of from a more macro perspective. We're not really focusing just on crypto. There's so many things to focus on here, so we do a lot of the price watching. But the regulatory conversation has really kind of carried the headlines for the last couple of years, and I got my interest in that through the Ripple case. So that was then, and it's been a really fun journey ever since. I did take a blockchain course just to kind of get myself familiar with the side of the technology side of things, and just really found it fascinating. Um, and I have so much respect for people who are like totally tech savvy in this space. Like I enjoy, learning new things, but I feel like I'm much more kind of attracted to, I'd say, like the regulation, the regulatory side of things, just because it changes all. I mean, just changes all the time. There's always headlines. There's always things to talk about, whether it's the SEC, whether it's Gary Gensler, the CFTC, whether it's Micah overseas in Europe, China. There's always new and exciting things going on. So, I kind of found this niche in this beat, and I've been really enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to continuing it. But yeah, I kind of just fell into it just by chance, sort of kind of looking at the Ripple case with my boss, and from there, it's kind of history. So here I am today, and I'm a producer and a journalist for Fox Business Network. I produce Charlie Gasparino, who's my boss. He's excellent. And do a lot of writing for the web. I do Twitter lives and come on spaces and talk about my findings. And it's been a lot of fun. I'm enjoying the space, and I'm looking forward to hopefully, some good news coming out of the crypto world, because it's been pretty gloomy the last couple months.
Yeah. I think if we've just been paying attention to what goes on in the headlines, of course, one could say that the crypto space isn't going anywhere. But I think, for those individuals that are more mercenary-like, that enjoy this market for its volatility, whether to the upside or the downside as a trader, I think it's honestly been pretty well. We've had some pretty good liquidity to the upside, and prices from the opening bell in early January up until now have been quite impressive, especially after all the events that have occurred last year. But, you know, going back to that, right, events that occurred last year, we've had FTX and a lot of these entities that were in America, right? And then all of a sudden we have the SEC suing, Gemini and Coinbase and things of that nature. Do you think, moving forward, there has to be some sort of restructuring with the SEC? It doesn't really make any sense that, they're going after BlackRock in a sense, since Larry is going to be partnering up with Coinbase in providing their digital asset custodian services and things like that. Do you think my question is, do you think Gary Gensler is potentially going to step down given all the financial hardships that he's caused in this industry? I think from the bank collapses and also the crypto landscape, which he backed, right? I think Sam Beckman-Fried met with the White House 3 times, met with Gary about twice, and the amount of money that has been destroyed over the past 18 months under the watchful eye of Gary Gensler has been, significantly more than the 2008 crisis. Would love to know your thoughts on that, and how that looks for the regulatory environment. Because I think we kind of get lost in what quote unquote regulation looks like, especially here in America, where you have Coinbase, who's one of the pioneers in the crypto landscape as far as onboarding new users and even institutions.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the good things about at least at least obviously the 4 year system that we have here, right? It's, there's turnover. It's not like we have the same president and the same, set of congressmen and congresswomen for too long. Although actually, some would argue that you do because people people tend to stay on until they're in their 80s. But as far as regulators go, there is turnover there. So there's never one chairman of the SEC for too long. And I think that with the change of administration coming, I mean, who knows what the outcome there is going to be, but there's definitely momentum building up for more positivity, I feel like, in the crypto space, and outside the crypto space in government. You see these companies like Coinbase, like Grayscale, like Ripple, kind of rallying the industry, right, to encourage people to reach out to their congressmen, to their congresswomen, to say, hey, like, we want this technology around, we use it, we don't like what the SEC and what the federal government is doing to try and stifle it. So I think there's going to be changes coming for sure. And one big step in that first kind of baby steps towards change is uh, the kind of the onboarding of these institutions that you're seeing now. These big institutions like BlackRock, like Fidelity, Invesco, Wisdom Tree, these massive Wall Street institutions who before, kind of maybe dabbled in Bitcoin, maybe kind of knew what it was, maybe had some investments, but for the most part weren't making headlines on this stuff. And I think it's only recently that we've seen kind of all the drama that we've seen in the crypto world, right? We've seen, the collapse of Terra. We saw FTX. Crypto has been brought much more into the forefront of, the financial headlines. It's become kind of integrated with, things like not quite as integrated as things as like, like the Fed and like Jobs Day and all that kind of thing. But like it's getting up there. People are getting really interested in crypto, and it's starting to matter in a way that I don't think it did, in the 2020 election. So and you see that already. We see that with the presidential candidates coming out in favor of Bitcoin. I say, hey, you can donate to my campaign in Bitcoin. And it's kind of both sides of the aisle. Like the aisle, we see both Democrats and Republicans doing that. So I think there's positive momentum. I think, will Gary Gensler step down? Will he resign? I don't get that sense. I think he really kind of wants to make his mark here. I mean, he kind of has already as sort of the severely anti crypto guy, right? But I think there's more that he can do. And I don't think that, unless there's something really crazy going on behind the scenes where there's some like, crazy investigation and they find him guilty of all this stuff. I just don't see that happening like in a short amount of time where it wouldn't be before like we get a new SEC chair. And so, I mean, I could be wrong, but we'll see. We'll see kind of how the future plays out. But it's looking more and more optimistic as we get closer to 2024.
Eleanor, so given that you have experience speaking with these individuals that are at the forefront of not only onboarding institutions, but are also building some of these products out, these infrastructure products, in your eyes, how do you view regulation coming into America? And what I mean by that is, what can we do now in the crypto landscape that we wouldn't be able to do, say, 5 years in the future as American citizens when quote unquote regulation comes into the system?
You're saying like, what can we do to like improve
Yeah,
what
yeah,
is okay?
yeah.
Sorry.
Like what? Yeah, yeah. So basically, like, if regulation comes to America, what are some things that we wouldn't be able to have access to, right? Because when I hear the terms regulation, it's like a word that's thrown out, but there's not really any context to it, right? Like there isn't anything that I can't do now that I wouldn't be able to do 5 years ago, right? Like I'm still able to, go on these different chains, access these different exchanges and all that stuff. So, like in your eyes, what exactly is regulation? Because we've seen even the top hedge funds invest in FTX and things of the like, and there's even talks about FTX relaunching, and there's word on the street that if FTX 2.0 becomes a thing, it would be the world's first quote unquote regulated cryptocurrency exchange.
Right, right. I see what you're saying. It's a good question because I mean, right now the water is so muddy, right? We can't even see like 2 weeks into the future, let alone a couple years into the future. But I think the tokenization of real world assets is definitely going to be a thing down the line. You've got some companies who are really capitalizing on that. Not in this interview with Larry, but in previous ones we've had with him on Fox Business, he said, that is the future, is the tokenization of real world assets. So I think keep an eye on that. That's going to be something that, because it's all about the registration, right? And it's all about classifying is what is a digital asset? Is it a commodity? Is it a security? Is it something completely different? So I feel like once we get that sort of clarification, it'll be easier to, and obviously I'm speaking the obvious here, but it'll be easier to kind of um, know what kind of regulation is needed. And right now, and it's confusing because you've got these companies like Coinbase and Kraken and these American companies that are trying to do it the right way, trying to go into the SEC and say, what can we do better? What can we do right? And the SEC isn't giving them answers, but they are giving answers, or they are giving sort of a blessing to players like Prometheum, who, as you guys well know, like 2 weeks ago when when the CEO got up in front of Congress, they didn't really, they have this plan, but it's not really, it can't be really set into motion because they want to they want to be able to have people invest in these security digital securities. But what is a digital security? We don't have any classification for that right now. So there's all these ideas and everybody's throwing out their own opinions and their own wishes. And I feel like it's just, I don't know what the coming together point is, what the sticking point is, where someone's going to say, or people are going to say, here's what we need to do and here's the right way forward. You've got the McHenry Thompson bill that that's kind of been quiet. They've kind of been quiet on the Congress front, with that in the last few weeks. And forgive me, I have been out on vacation and then I was sick for for a week, so I may have missed some things on that front. But there was big headlines on that about 2 or 3 weeks ago. Just the fact that there was this comprehensive sort of framework, or this skeleton for what might be down the line. There's so many aspects to it. Like, you guys know better than I do. Like, there's the DeFi, there's the centralized exchanges, there's NFTs, there's the metaverse, there's Web3. Like, there's so many different aspects to this kind of crypto umbrella, and regulating it any one way, or any just under one umbrella, I don't think is going to happen. It's going to have to be regulated in many different ways, I think. But how do we do that? It's the most mammoth project I can I can think of in my mind. So I'm glad I'm not the one doing it. So respect to people who can actually do that and will do it. It's just going to be a matter of time to, I think, just figure out how, when, and what do we call these things?
See, this conversation really takes me back to something that I've been saying over the last couple of months, as far as this industry is about 14, 15 years old, right? So if you take a look at the Nasdaq, that index was created in 1973, and if we take into account that crypto moves at warp speed as far as market adoption, tech acceleration, money being raised, and all those things, I would say that potentially we could be entering the NASDAQ bubble of the late 1990s, where a lot of these figureheads from these institutions and market news reporters were all kind of saying the same thing, like, what are these internet stocks, what are these internet companies, what is the internet going to look like in 10 to 20 years? So from your perspective, do you see the cryptocurrency landscape following what the tech industry did, going to the late 90s and then into the 2000s, when that's when really we started having that mass adoption, or the S curve of the cycle, right? So instead of cryptocurrency taking 3 decades for it to achieve mass adoption, potentially we can have that surge completed by the end of the decade.
Yeah, and I feel like just because there's obviously better technology now than there was 10, 15, 20 years ago, when these internet stocks and the early Amazons and the Microsofts and the Googles they were building on the World Wide Web. Right now we've got blockchain technology, which kind of really carries this industry forward. And today, I keep going back to the Fink interview, but I keep just keep going back, things keep reminding me of it. One of the questions to him was, you used to be a crypto skeptic, like, kind of what changed your mind, and what do you think about the technology? Is anybody really using this technology? And Larry was like, yeah, he's like, actually, he's like, I'm most bullish on the technology because, that's really what's going to change the world. That's really what's going to change, outdated practices and make things faster. And I think because the technology obviously today is much faster than it was, I think the adoption rate might be a little faster than perhaps it was for the tech stocks. But then again, like there's a I always ask this. I'm like, what was, because obviously I don't remember this when kind of the dot-com bubble. I was a little bit too young, but I mean, was there so much kind of fear and like um, overreaction, I want to say, from like lawmakers back then, like with like kind of like making laws and rules around this thing? It's I almost feel like, I mean, and from everything I've heard from my colleagues and my friends who remember that time, it's kind of like, well, they kind of just let it thrive, right? Like the World Wide Web was like this thing, and there was regulation, but there wasn't like crazy regulation to the point where they were subpoena or they were suing like every single company that was dabbling in the internet. So it's just I don't know what changed between then and now. I thought maybe because it's just a faster technology. It's kind of unknown. It's crypto, like it's got like the word cryptographic. It's kind of like it's almost mysterious in itself. I don't know if that if that has any explanation, but yeah, it's baffling to me.
Yeah, from interviews that I've seen, these old YouTube clips and clips that you find on TikTok and all those things, you can find clips of Bill Gates being laughed at and Jeff Bezos being laughed at on various Tonight shows, like Jay Leno and so like the late night show with Larry, that one guy on CNN, with the slick back hair and glasses.
Larry King
Can't remember the last name. Yes, him. Yeah.
and the suspenders.
And yeah. And if you remember, when Microsoft released Windows 99 or 98, they had a little press conference where they started doing some dances and all that stuff, and you see Bill Gates doing this like weird dad dance and all that stuff, and people were calling it scams, vaporware, and all that stuff. But I kind of feel like the crypto space is within that landscape. But I know we don't have much time with you. I think we only have like 20-25 minutes left. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it out over to Max. Max, what's going on, brother? Feel free to shoot, I don't know, Eleanor, some of your thoughts on what's going on in the broader macro space in regards to the cryptocurrency market. And thank you guys so much, by the way. Thank you, Eric, Adrian, for coming up on the panel. Looking forward to hearing from you guys. And if you guys are new to these spaces, we're here speaking with Eleanor Terrett. She works for Fox Business, and we are talking about all things macro in the cryptocurrency market landscape. We're talking about litigation and all those things. Speaking about that, see, we also have Matt and Joe Carlos there. Invited you gentlemen up to speak. Always love having you guys up on the panel. We have these discussions. So without further ado, go ahead and follow us if you guys are enjoying this conversation to keep up with all of our shows. So, Max, go on ahead, brother.
Yeah, certainly. Wabi, Eleanor, it's been great listening, and I'm excited to dive into this conversation. But Eleanor, I actually have a question for you. And of course, I'm going to ask you your opinion on it because nothing is etched in concrete at this point. But up until this point, there have been numerous attempts from different companies to file for a spot Bitcoin ETF. None in the U.S. Have been successful at this point. However, there have been Bitcoin futures ETFs, and now suddenly we're seeing Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, up on Fox explaining how Bitcoin is an international asset. And actually, BlackRock recently filed for a Bitcoin spot ETF. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, BlackRock has a success rate of filing for ETFs that is above 95% success rate. My question to you would be, do you think that's going to be BlackRock that ends up finally delivering a spot ETF? And that was sort of, I hate to even go tinfoil hat, but that's really what the SEC was waiting for, was for somebody, a partner like BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, to step in to deliver this product.
I think there's a very good chance, like you said, I think they got one ETF denied in the past with over 5,000 approved. So their track record is pretty good. But none of their previous ones had anything to do with crypto. So I think, this is kind of a new field, right? It's a new step. So even for BlackRock, this is, while it's a tried and true practice to file for an ETF, it's a different kind of ETF, and it comes at a time when there's a lot of tension around the industry, around regulations, around what is a digital asset, what is it not. So it's an interesting time, but I think I it's BlackRock, right? I mean, like you said, he's Larry obviously like built the company, but they have $9 trillion under assets. They're a very, very powerful, well-known U.S. corporation. And it kind of like, if you think about it, I mean, this is kind of my opinion, right? Like you think about the U.S. government, I feel like they, as institutionalists, right? They've dealt with banks. It's kind of like you look at the Elizabeth Warrens, you look at the Brad Shermans, you look at kind of the crypto skeptics. They're all kind of in favor of traditional banking and traditional finance, whatever that might look like. Even though we did see 3 banks go under in the last year, it's kind of like you let the big boys kind of play, right, instead of the little guys playing in the sandbox, saying like, oh, we have this great solution, we think we can do this. When the big players come in and they say, oh no, well, we've got the big guns, and we're going to do this, we're going to try our hand at it. It's kind of it makes sense that the government would be like, oh, okay, well, they're tried and true, they're a big name, they've got a lot of money, they've got a lot of experience in just in finance and in the markets, and we feel like we can trust them. I don't know if the SEC is saying these things, but it would ring true, kind of just what you would expect from government, to be like, oh, well, they're obviously going to give it to the big players, as opposed to maybe say the grayscales or the people who kind of are newer companies looking to play in the sandbox, as it were. So in answer to your question, I don't I don't know, because we have seen similar applications from people like Wisdom Tree, who another multi-billion-dollar company, Fidelity, VanEck, and I feel like they're going to keep kind of coming out of the woodwork as more and more file. I'm sure others will as well. So while it's a race to the top, I do feel like BlackRock probably has a little bit of an edge, but the SEC, everyone refiled, right? Because the SEC said, oh, it's actually, we're not satisfied with these filings, we need more. So again, they're pioneering they're pushing like it's the first step in this kind of direction. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Eleanor. Now, one of the main attributes that I personally love, and most people that are enthusiasts of Bitcoin or digital assets love and appreciate, is that you can custody your own assets. One concern that I have, of course, is that these large corporations are potentially working their hardest to, squeeze through that tiny door to be the first to actually have a Bitcoin spot ETF approved so that they can custody your assets, which takes away, of course, one of the strongest inherent principles of owning Bitcoin, is that you can custody your own assets. One debate that we've had numerous times on this show is what the next wave of crypto adoption will look like. Whether it's sort of more of the same, Coinbase facilitating the sale of Bitcoin and Ethereum and other digital assets through smartphone apps, to just more or less to retail, with potentially some larger players like a Michael Saylor or other institutions beginning to slowly join the fight. My question to you would be, do you think that the next wave of adoption is really driven by a Bitcoin spot ETF, enabling people that were previously maybe a little bit intimidated or turned off by the complexity of onboarding their fiat to Bitcoin? Or it could potentially be something like smartphone integration, where Apple and Android, or Samsung, any of the smartphone companies integrate, crypto exchanges into their wallet applications, hence putting, crypto or Bitcoin digital assets in the hands of, I believe there's like 6.5, 7 billion smartphones worldwide right now. What does the next wave of adoption look like, in your opinion?
Oh, these are such good questions, and I haven't really thought about these answers before. But just like listening to you talk and kind of just like giving it a quick sort of like run through in my head, I guess. I mean, when you come to Bitcoin spot ETF, I think the whole goal, at least for BlackRock, is to make Bitcoin more accessible to people who don't necessarily want to go through I don't know, other means to buy it, or they want to make it cheaper, I guess. Like Larry said that today. He's like, we want to, make it cheaper, easier to access, and more more accessible to the average person. And I think we have to remember that, like, America is huge, and the average person doesn't really understand crypto. And I think, like, a lot of people on these, obviously, like, people in the crypto space, people on these spaces calls, crypto Twitter, crypto publications, people who run crypto companies, that's like what they live and breathe, right? So this stuff really does make sense to people. But I think from a wider standpoint, people kind of look at it like, like, I don't really understand it. How do I get into it? Like, make it make sense to me. I have people talking to me all the time saying, can you explain crypto to me? I see you report on crypto. Can you explain it? And, so I think at that level, there needs to be some kind of, like, education there and comprehensive way of getting people into the market. So I think, a Bitcoin spot ETF is a good start. Will it be a mass adoption? I don't know. I'm not necessarily sure. I don't think so, because not everybody invests, right? If you're going to invest in an ETF, that's kind of like, you've got to have some kind of knowledge of, like, investing there. And there's a big percentage of the population who doesn't understand Wall Street, who doesn't invest. But they do have smartphones and they do have apps on their phone, and they do have, trading platforms. And so you mentioned the integration of the iPhones and all the Androids. I think, that potentially, when it's right in front of you and when it's kind of explained to you, and it's not sort of this, like, foreign entity that people are talking about around you, then that's when adoption will come. I think there needs to be just more understanding and more education around it. I say, who did I ask this question to? Someone recently, and it was, when will we be able to buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin? And it's going to come to me at the end of the interview. I forget who it was I asked. And this person was like, "Oh, not for a long time." Oh, you know who it was? It was the Kraken people. I had a meeting with their CEO and their chief legal officer recently, and we were just talking about, like, coverage and, like, how we cover crypto here at Fox Business. And I was like, well, it was like, kind of from a macro perspective here, because we're not totally focusing on crypto all the time. Like, our anchors want to know, when can we buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin? And they're like, oh, well, that's pretty far off into the future. But I think when that moment comes and people can, just go onto their phone and say, all right, here's my crypto in exchange for coffee or in exchange for a sandwich, then it's going to be more widely adopted. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm not sure if I could be totally off the ball there, but you let me know what you think.
Yeah, Eleanor, before we pass it on over to the other people on the panel, I do want to say I think Brian Armstrong is leading that charge for the next wave of adoption. And the reason why I say that is because, when you open up the Coinbase app, you are able to have tutorials on, what is this asset? What is that asset? What are you able to do with it? And you're able to explore, the vast cryptoverse through a wide variety of means, right? You see links to the project's website. You see a breakdown of what the project is, what it does, what have you. And on top of that, Brian has been within this industry, for well over 10 years and has worked with regulatory bodies from across the globe. And, he's the one that's fighting for the people. And I feel like just as Steve Jobs led the tech revolution back in the 90s, early 2000s, I kind of feel that we need that for the cryptocurrency landscape. So whether it's Brian Armstrong, whether it's Michael Saylor, I do think that, despite the things that have happened in 2022, I still believe that, there is some light to this industry. And in time, what we classified as, safe investments, right? Like dollar cost averaging into the Dow Jones or the S&P 500, right? I think over time, people are going to look back in this era and realize, like, wow, I had the chance to invest in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and what have you at X valuation, right? So I think I think a lot of these things are sort of like underlooked, and given that there's so many more market participants in this space, I think that the bad tends to overshadow the good, right? And in bear markets, whether people want to call it a bear market or a quieter market, whatever you want to label it as, there's still some progress being done in the shadows, right? And that typically shows in the next bull market when this entity is able to come into the market, just as we saw in 2020, 2021, when we had publicly traded companies add on Bitcoin to their balance sheet. I think eventually, like, we might even have an Ethereum spot ETF, which I'd love to get your thoughts on that, given that we've seen other institutions like Galaxy Digital and even HSBC, I believe, also added both Bitcoin and Ethereum spot ETFs for their clients. And I do tend to think, as far as tech goes, I do think that the East does lead the charge for all that stuff. But would love to know your thoughts on that, Eleanor, before we pass it on over to Matt and then Eric and Tucker.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely an Ethereum ETF is probably on the horizon at some point. It seems like the natural next step, right? Because it's the number two, Bitcoin's the number one. Once we get Bitcoin figured out, I'm sure Ethereum will follow, or maybe if we can get them figured out at the same time. I'm not sure if that's possible. But yeah, I mean, it's another form of expanding your portfolio, expanding your investments, right, and making crypto as a whole accessible to the wider public. And I think Bitcoin's obviously held on to the number one spot for a very long time. It's the original. It's the original one. It's it's the most valuable. People seem to see it as the sort of the safest, right? The most one with the most quality. But people use Ethereum too, and they really, the use cases on the Ethereum, blockchain. I think a lot of people, and I was talking about this with someone today, like a lot of people build on the Ethereum blockchain, like a lot of projects, a lot of companies. So I think there's a lot of value to be had, there as well, and other blockchains will follow. It's just another way of kind of making it accessible and kind of demystifying what the you know what is in cryptocurrency, what is in digital assets. But as far as someone leading a charge, I think you're right. I think we're going to see people emerge as kind of those sort of leaders. Obviously Coinbase is now pushing back at the SEC. Brian Armstrong is leading that charge, so it could very well be him. We're supposed to get an outcome from the SEC Ripple case in the next few weeks, hopefully. I know it's dragged on for a good amount of time now, but depending on how that turns out, Brad Garlinghouse is the CEO of Ripple, so he could come out. Obviously, they're in litigation now, so he could come out and kind of be a little bit more vocal about the future of crypto, against regulation, against the SEC. If they have a favorable outcome. But I think you're right in saying that someone led the tech charge, and someone's going to lead the crypto charge. It's just kind of early days yet.
Beautiful, beautiful. Matt, go on ahead, and then we'll pass it on over to Eric and Tucker. Matt, what's going on, brother? Hope you've been
Hey,
good.
thanks for having me up, King Wabi.
Problem,
Loving
brother.
the interview. Thanks, Eleanor. You had a good question a second ago of, when are we actually going to see that mass adoption of being able to pay for a coffee in Bitcoin? And quite frankly, I think we've been patiently waiting for technology to catch up to where Bitcoin already was. I technically owned Bitcoin before I had my first smartphone back in the day, and I've just been amazed at how much payment systems and payment rails have finally caught up. I'm in a blessed position where I get to travel around the world on my own, and it's been a long time since I've had to exchange any currencies anymore. You probably, as long as you have a Visa card or MasterCard, or you name it, digital cards on your iPhone, you can just contactless pay almost anywhere you want to go in the Western world, both hemispheres. So I think that honestly, that's just around the corner for Bitcoin once it gets a large enough market cap that it looks profitable to the likes of Apple and Google. It's not that hard for them to okay, I see that I hold Bitcoin, but on the back end, they're instantaneously just converting that to USD, converting that to the local currency, and then the vendor or the merchant gets whatever gets whatever denomination or fiat, or maybe they want Bitcoin, but gets whatever they accept on their end, and you feel like you paid in Bitcoin, and it all happens in a split second, like it does with everything else these days. So that probably just happens. I don't know. Maybe give it another 1 trillion market cap or something. But I like to think that the previous all-time high was marked with um, Tim Cook announcing on CNBC that yes, he actually does hold Bitcoin and Ethereum in his own personal wealth, and he thinks it's part of a diversified portfolio. So we already know that these CEOs have been looking at this asset for quite a long, long time, and it's probably just not big enough for them to move in that direction yet.
Beautifully well said, Matt. Beautifully well said. Eric, what's going on, man? Great to have you on the panel. Hope you've been well, brother. What's going on, brother? What do you have for ourselves and Eleanor, man? Great to have you once again, brother.
Hey, how's it going, man? Thanks for inviting me up. Hope everyone's well today, Eleanor. Thanks. It was great to have you on the space. Let's see. I think Matt hit some great points as far as adoption goes. That's kind of what I'll touch on. I'm in a lot of spaces with a lot of these developers that are working, with Bitcoin, and I think with the Federal Reserve trying to push some digital type of currency that may spark more things for Bitcoin to be widely adopted. I mean, you've got your BRCs, BRC20s, and other coins that are on Bitcoin. So, they're taking that DeFi level up a notch with Bitcoin. So when you talk about exchanges and banks, Bitcoin could be that one central type of exchange, right? It's got almost $1 trillion market cap now. I haven't checked what it currently is sitting at, but with all this development, with the way the world's going, we're just going to see that type of adoption, I think, coming. And then, I've been reading a lot more into what miners and early people that worked on Bitcoin were doing, and 10 years ago, they were talking about payment systems and recursive filing size to bring files down, down to under 1 kilobyte. There's 4K videos now on Bitcoin that are under 1 kilobyte in size. So I think it becomes the Internet of Things, and people will see that as the years to come, just because of the immutability of it and what all these developers are doing with it when it comes to metaverse and ordinals and such. So exciting times. As far as ETFs go, I'm never really a fan of an ETF as far as for Bitcoin per se, because it's not something physical like your gold or your silver, right? So it's how is that tied specifically to the Bitcoin price on the blockchain when you're talking about the price of Bitcoin? Well, to bring adoption, sure, but at the end of the day, Bitcoin's meant for someone to actually hold that in their wallet, not something on paper where you have no control of. So I'm hit or miss on an ETF, and I'm just curious to see what's going on. But I do like what Brian Armstrong is doing for all of crypto, fighting for that.
Eleanor, I'd love to know your thoughts as far as like what you've seen these figureheads talk about when it comes to things like DeFi and what I'd like to call that sector of the crypto space, the quote unquote growth space, or what you would call like the Russell 2000, right? So, have you noticed any rumblings as far as DeFi is concerned here in the United States?
When you say talking heads, like heads of like regulatory or like
Yeah,
Congress people or
Yeah, regulatory, Congress, and also more specifically, capital management, like individuals like say like a Larry Fink, things of that nature. Would really like to have that insight on what these TradFi guys are looking to scale into, because I think I think everyone at this point already knows that Bitcoin is a good bet long term, and it's sort of like a very early stage, say like S&P 500 or Dow Jones and what have you, and everything else is kind of the growth sector, right? Like your Russells, your Nasdaqs, and things of that nature. Because I have also noticed that Mike Novogratz and also the boys over at Pantera Capital, they're really like the only institutions. Of course, they are a lot smaller than these other guys like Fidelity, but they've started to offer some services where clients are able to be exposed within those growth sectors.
Yeah, I personally haven't heard too much on the DeFi front, and I feel like that's kind of just because it's, everything since crypto kind of became more mainstream in the headlines, I suppose, in the last couple of years, it's all been about CeFi and, these exchanges and sort of the people involved in these companies and these entities. And with DeFi, obviously, it's the technology. It's spread across a whole bunch of different people. It's kind of it's if they thought that crypto was confusing, then like thinking about DeFi and how that runs and how that kind of how that is integrated into finance systems that we have now, I think that's kind of mind blowing. So and I believe that with regulatory figureheads and with Congress, I think they're trying to figure out sort of the the groundwork, right? Like the bitcoins, the how do we regulate something like that? How do we Ethereum's, the tokens, the before they get to DeFi, and I know that there's some stuff about DeFi in the McCarthy bill. McCarthy bill, what am I saying? Yeah, in the McHenry bill, not McCarthy. But I think that's going to kind of come as a second wave. And I haven't heard too much chatter on the sort of institution side with the TradFi. I think because it's so sort of far removed from TradFi, it's almost just like, all right, well, we'll kind of get to that when we get to it. I'm sure it will be integrated at some point. It's probably more on, like you said, like more of like a niche investment vehicle right now, or some companies that get it, some companies that can offer it exposure to it are doing it, but it won't be probably brought into mainstream for quite some time. And that's just my opinion, but I haven't heard too much on that side of things.
Beautiful, beautifully said. Tucker, what's going on, brother? What do you have for us, man? Great to have you up on the panel.
Yeah, man, it's been great. It's been hanging out, listening. I do just have a quick question for you, Eleanor. Sorry if you hear a dog barking. I'm outside. I wanted to get your take on derivatives, and whether or not you think that places like Coinbase, Gemini, Kraken, wherever might at some point gain the ability to give retail access to compliant derivatives in the U.S., or whether you think it's a no-go, or whether you think the government and SEC is going to try to contain that to something like an EDX exchange.
I'm going to be 100% honest with you, Tucker, and let you know that I don't really know. That's not really my area of expertise. I would imagine that, if enough people want it and enough people, if that really is going to be kind of a want of the people, and people are going to say, well, it's just like crypto, we want these derivatives, then I feel like it might be. There could definitely be a push for it, but I'm not going to, I don't want to like speculate on something that I'm not like 100%, up to speed on. So I apologize, but yeah.
No, you're all good. That's totally fine, because I know it's been a subject of kind of contention at least the last few years. Just people having to use like KuCoin and some other exchanges that actually offer derivatives if you live in the U.S. And it's just been kind of a nightmare for some retail participants. So I didn't know if you had any insights, but I mean, yeah, me personally, I probably expect they'd want to contain it to some sort of controlled institution, something like an EDX exchange. I don't know if Coinbase ever gets the seal of approval on something like that, but I guess we'll find out. But yeah, no, that's all I had. Just hanging out, enjoying. So kick it back to you, Bobby.
I think it was KuCoin, and I'm pretty sure I was on a Spaces with them. Were they the ones that they wanted to offer? They wanted to offer like early. It wasn't early voting, but it was oh gosh, like betting on the election almost. Like there was kind of there was a program where they were trying to roll it out, and it got denied by the CFTC, I believe. But it was kind of like, it was like a derivatives sort of, it was sort of what you were talking about, but in terms of like securing your future based on the election. And I remember they kind of reached out to me about it. It was a headline for a while, and it was shot down by the CFTC, I believe. That's kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, when I say derivatives, I more mean like different futures and options type of trading. But that definitely, I mean, that might have been KuCoin. I'm not 100% sure. Wabi, do you know exactly what exchange?
Yeah, it's definitely not KuCoin. They don't really do many Twitter Spaces. I do know there was like one exchange um, that operates, while including Americans. The name escapes my head, but I believe that was like during 2021 or something like that. But you see, we have Will's Outlook with his hand up, and I did invite Big Uncle Joe Carlos, 6'6", former NBA champion, and former head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell's mentor, Big Joe Carlos, Uncle Joe, as he's known here on the show. Invited you up to speak, brother. But Will's Outlook, go on ahead and give us your outlook.
I mean, there's a lot of exchanges I think out there. I think a lot of people are speculating the wrong direction. I think people are looking more towards, you know, one of the current, crypto CEXs to be that leader. I think it's going to go the other way. I think it's going to go one of the current stock bro type of platforms to be the next leader in that scenario. And I think that, when you look at it from a security standpoint and you look at it from the way these platforms are set up, it's very difficult to kind of say, that Coinbase or Kraken or any of these guys are going to be, the next leader when it comes to assets. I think the government wants everything kind of like in one place. TD Ameritrades, Charles Schwab, so on and so forth. And the way to do that is, and really, I think we'll see that, or at least we'll be able to acknowledge that once we see our first basically spot ETF. I think the person who leads the charge on the spot ETF ends up with being the person that runs, both sides of the asset class, when it comes between crypto and traditionals. But I mean that's just my thought. I just want to kind of throw that in there with the conversation. Um, but I find it interesting. I just think that people are thinking of it the wrong direction. I don't think that the government looks at Coinbase and takes them seriously. I don't think the government looks at now. I do think they look at USDC, right, as an opportunity, potentially for a dollar, right, for the US dollar. Um, but at the same time, they could always come out with their own currency too. It's not difficult to make a stable coin. So I would say in that aspect, it's hard to even gauge that as USDC is going to be their leader or whatever. But yeah, I just it's really kind of curious, and I'd like to get your take too, Eleanor, on this, like how all these exchanges all of a sudden out of the woodwork, and they haven't been starting anything as far as what I can see, are now starting to move across the board as far as CEXs go, and just starting to require KYC to be able to operate on their platforms, when most of them don't even operate in areas that can be, served with an SEC notice for even giving, what could potentially be securities or whatnot.
Yeah, I know it's interesting. Let me just divert really quickly, or it's going to really bother me if I don't say what I was talking about before. I literally looked it up real quick. It wasn't KuCoin at all. It was Kalshi. You guys ever heard of Kalshi? They allow you to trade on real world events. You can buy and sell event contracts on markets, but that's what the CFTC was shooting down. So just for you guys' information, it was not KuCoin. Starts with a K, so my brain's sort of in the right place. But as far as, I feel like the government not taking Coinbase seriously, I feel like they're not taking anybody in this space seriously right now, which doesn't bode well at all for, the immediate future of cryptocurrency. I think there is potentially more fallout to come. I'd like to get your guys' take on what Will just said as well.
Yeah, as far as like what I think about these platforms offering derivatives to like U.S. citizens, I think the free market's just going to do what it does, right? I just think that if you're going to be dabbling in these platforms, just don't have like your entire net worth into them, right? First and foremost, I do believe that this is a market where you do have to, take custody of your own assets, and that means having a hardware wallet, perhaps even a multi-sig. And for those of you that don't know what a multi-sig is, it's essentially one of the highest grades of protection that you could have with your own personal assets, and a lot of DAOs do have a multi-sig. So yeah, those are really like my thoughts in regards to some of like the derivatives exchange. And do I think derivatives are coming to the US eventually? I do. Right, if we can have a Bitcoin futures ETF be approved before spot ETF, then I definitely do think that derivatives are going to come into the market. But let me see who else is on the panel. Adrian, go ahead and give your thoughts, brother. Wanted to give you a chance to speak on the panel as well, man. Thanks for coming up on the panel. And ladies and gentlemen, prepare to hear one of the smoothest voices that you've ever heard on these Twitter spaces. So, Adrian, welcome to the show. Thank you for participating on the panel. Hope you're doing well, my brother from another mother. How are you doing today, man? What do you have for us? What are your thoughts on the current conversation that we're having with Eleanor, man? Anything you want to bring up?
Actually, not really. I'm just like I'm relatively new to this concept. I'm just like sitting here absorbing, listening, seeing what's happening. Because regulation and Bitcoin, anything cryptocurrency related, interests me a lot, as I do hold assets in that, not purchased assets, but assets that were given. And so for me, I think the legal aspect always interests me a lot, especially when it comes to something like this, a digital asset. Like, how does one legislate that? And it's the same thing as going to the police station and saying, hey, a crime was committed on me, a hate crime in cyberspace. Like, what the fuck is cyberspace? It's the same kind of stuff. And I think, especially also with immutable data storage, this is something that's really interesting as it pertains to law, because when you say, hey, how do you legalize the blockchain? How do you impact that? That's actually a problem, personally, because there can be all kinds of content on there. And I think at some point authorities will be interested in legislating the usage of a blockchain or the usage of a node, because everything's on there and you can't do anything about it. So I'm not sure what this would bring. But yeah, for the moment, I'm just like listening, doing pretty well. Currently at work though, so I'm like multitasking, and also at the same time I'm doing some obfuscation for a treasure hunt. So yeah, I'm packed.
Great to hear from you, man. Great to hear from you. Always like tuning into your late night shows, brother. But Will's outlook, go on ahead, brother.
No, I do hear the conversation a lot. I think around the subject of, how can they regulate, what can they do, and I think they already are doing regulation. And that regulation that I think is currently occurring is, I've discussed this in the past, is off ramp and on ramp controls, right? And you do that mainly through CEXs, and I think it'll eventually work its way into hardware wallets. Well, not necessarily hardware, but more like cold storage wallets, right? Anything that allows money to flow in on and off, I think will be their way of controlling crypto in a sense, and kind of paying attention to it and understanding where the money's flowing. Really, I mean, we saw in 2021, basically the IRS was looking to take on people that could read blockchain, understand blockchain, so on and so forth. Obviously, probably because they were trying to expand their approach on being able to pay attention to bigger players, as well as probably go after scams. I would think, for the most part, a lot of people think it's just to monitor your average guy who has like $2,000 in crypto. We gotta make sure we're getting every penny out of them. But the reality is there's a lot of sus stuff that happens on the blockchain. And when you get millions of dollars flowing around and all of a sudden disappearing, not necessarily disappearing, because it never does on the blockchain. Obviously, you need to be able to track that / trace that. And I think that's a lot of their efforts in those areas. But I think eventually that they're working on methods, right? So they're trying to close the doors between us being able to get in and get out. And that's basically, you got a hall monitor to get in, you got a hall monitor to get out. And that's how they're going to pay attention, I think, to crypto for now, until they figure out a way to regulate. But you can't, in reality, in my own opinion, like something like Bitcoin, there's no way you can regulate it. You can't shut it down, you can't stop it, you can't slow it. um what are you going to do at the end of the day? So that specifically, yeah, that's going to be very difficult for the government specifically. But like when you're looking at anything other than Bitcoin, there's a face behind it, there's an entity behind it, there's a person behind it. And because there's all those things, there's risk behind it, right? And that risk is the government coming and knocking on their door and telling them, hey, we're shutting down your project, we're shutting down your company. We're coming over, we're saying you can't use this over here in the US anymore. So now, most of your investors are going to dump your token, and now it's going to go to zero because nobody's going to have faith in it, and so on and so forth. And this is how they'll regulate, right? And this is how they've been regulating. It's been regulation through a tax on the blockchain and on projects in the blockchain. And I've seen some pretty good projects out there. Like I'm not even gonna sit like people sit there and talk about, oh, Bitcoin's the only thing, but there are some real world use case projects out there that are doing real world things and working with real world companies. And I think that they have a place in blockchain, even outside of Bitcoin. And the government, again, it's just it does what it does. And I think a lot of this too is businesses being opened in blockchain. How do you define a business in blockchain, right? Do they need a business license? Do they need to go through the SEC? Do they need to be regulated in any way or another? And this is where like there's so much red tape. It's difficult to really kind of figure out how to approach this. And the SEC coming out and just saying, "Hey, these 50 coins are securities," is it's not a solution. It's not a solution. The reality is too that they just don't have the means to go after that many companies at once and that many blockchain, areas at once. It's very interesting. Um, at times, I think a lot of this goes back to taxes. But then, at other times, it's like, what are they really trying to do here? Are they trying to protect the dollar? Are they trying to get taxes to make sure that they can regulate through that way? Like, what is the purpose of the government in blockchain? And I think that's what everybody tries to come to a lot of these conversations. And I always look at it like this: like, it doesn't matter, right? It really does. For me, it doesn't matter, right? They can do whatever they want. I know me as an individual, I got to pay my taxes, and that's it. Outside of that, I don't have to explain anything that I'm doing as far as my activity. Um, yeah, so that's kind of the way I'm looking at it or approaching it from the government standpoint and what they're doing. But again, I think CEXs are, that's their approach right now, is just to go through those and hall monitor through CEXs on chain, off chain. But I think Fidelity and BlackRock have a real potential here if they can get the spot, man. If I'm actually kind of scared, not gonna lie, if BlackRock gets a spot here, oh man, they control so much already. It would be insane to let them have that.
So
I would,
that's something interesting that you're bringing up, Wood. I'm sorry to cut you off, man, but
yeah.
you also mentioned how a lot of these altcoin projects, or growth projects, whatever you want to call them, have faces behind them. So this is a question to the panel, and I'll bring it over to Eleanor first. Do we think that people like Michael Saylor, right, that own one out of every 100 Bitcoin in circulation, and as a matter of fact, right, I've been bringing this up for quite a couple of months now. The current amount that Michael Saylor has on his balance sheet, is currently more than the amount of Bitcoin that's going to be mined per block for the next year and a half. So, it seems like Eleanor does have to go. So, Eleanor, I want to thank you for coming up on the show, and looking forward to having you on sometime in the future. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come talk shop with us. So if you guys have enjoyed this conversation, feel free to follow us here. We host these spaces throughout the week, and feel free to follow Eleanor as well. Thank you so much, Eleanor.
Thank
And
you. Thank you so much for having me, guys. I appreciate it. I just have a super busy evening, so I got to hop. But thanks for having me, and hopefully I can come back and talk to you guys soon.
No problem. Looking forward to having you on the show relatively shortly in the future. Thank you so much. But yeah, guys, I think we can wrap up with that question, right? So, do we think that people like Michael Saylor, and even like figureheads like Brian Armstrong, aren't those the faces for a Bitcoin? I kind of feel that everything has its face, right? And one might even say in TradFi, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger might be the face of like the Dow Jones or the S&P, right? It is a bit out there, but they've kind of been the figureheads when it comes to traditional investing. And I kind of think, what the crypto landscape has are people like Michael Saylor and people like Brian Armstrong or an Elon Musk, or people from like Pantera Capital or Mike Novogratz, things of that nature. So I guess we'll kick it on over to Max. Max, what are your thoughts on what's being talked about here as far as, crypto having a face and those things? I think we can apply that to Bitcoin as well, even though like people consider like, oh, Satoshi Nakamoto is like, the de facto face of Bitcoin, this anonymous dev, this anonymous creator. When in reality, it's these individuals that facilitate the onboarding of people to come into this asset class to participate in the digital asset revolution. So, Max, I'll kick it on over to you, brother.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting question to ponder. I'll say this. It seems like every cycle or every impulse north in price has a new protagonist. I think some of them from last cycle, the obvious ones, of course, would be like CZ, SBF, of course, Michael Saylor. And then, of course, you start to move down a tier towards like the influencers, maybe, or, the guys that, they appear on national television to talk about Bitcoin, some of those guys. And then previous cycles, we could maybe say like John McAfee was, he's not in the same like class as a Michael Saylor, of course. It's a little bit of a different tone he's striking, but there always seems to be sort of like a new face. So I guess we'll see which ones end up sticking and who ends up being there for good. I think that Michael Saylor probably is going to be sort of like the de facto mascot of Bitcoin. And truthfully, I don't mind him being that guy. I've said this numerous times publicly, and I will continue to say it. I am rooting for Michael Saylor. I probably want Michael Saylor to win as much as Michael Saylor wants himself to win. I've got nothing but respect for the guy. I know people troll him because he doesn't time his purchases as selectively as maybe he could, but he's also he's a multi-billionaire, and I suppose if you're a billionaire and you've got a 10 or 20 or 100-year outlook on an asset, and you can afford to service the debt that you use to purchase that asset with, you probably don't have to be super particular about it. So you know what, if it works for him, God bless him. I'm definitely rooting for him. But one thing that you mentioned, Wabi, is that Michael Saylor currently holds about 1% of the circulating supply. I don't know if it's a problem, but my knee-jerk reaction to it is that it potentially is a problem to have that
So
large
Max, sorry to cut you off, but he owns not FDV but current circulating. He owns one out of every 100, and this is macro strategy, micro strategy, and his personal holdings. So basically, anything and everything affiliated with Michael Saylor, as far as like the current.
So he controls
supply.
about 1% of the supply, right?
Yeah, circulating
between his company and his personal, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if that I don't know if having that many Bitcoin 1% of the supply, in Michael Saylor, one individual's control or a company's control, that degree of concentration is problematic. But my knee-jerk reaction to it is that I don't like it. I believe that Bitcoin should be for everybody. I don't believe that it was. I don't believe that this was set in motion so that whales could come in and absorb a majority of the supply. Now, granted, there's plenty of other projects out there where the largest wallet controls 15 or 20% of the supply, and they still exist today. I'm not going to call anybody out or any projects out. But that's my only concern, is that I think that his passion and his obsession with this technology and this asset potentially has become maybe a little bit overreaching, and it could potentially lead to some some headwinds. It's like, imagine if an individual, for example, we're talking about. I just got a phone call there. In Michael Saylor's paradigm, from some of the stuff I've listened to him on podcasts and other series, he's talking about this potential of mass global adoption of Bitcoin. Maybe not like hyper Bitcoinization. How some of these guys like to imagine that there's no fiat currency and we're living in this like libertarian apocalyptic landscape where there's no federal government and everybody just barters in Bitcoin and carries a machine gun on their shoulder. It's like, he's definitely not advocating for that. We don't want that, of course. We don't need to get into that whole discussion. But, I think I think it can be problematic. Where I'm going with this is I think it can be problematic to have that concentrated of a supply in the control of one individual. And I don't think it's like a recipe for a disaster. But imagine if Bitcoin ends up becoming, something that we denominate certain commodities in, or it reaches a price of, let's just say 250,000 per coin one day. I think that's a long ways away if we ever get there. But let's just say it does, and we have somebody like Michael Saylor who owns 1% of the supply. I just don't know how that's going to slide. I have a tough time seeing that scenario through. It just seems like it couldn't happen, and I couldn't really give you much more detail as to why, other than imagine if somebody out there owned 1% of, like, 1% of the dollars, or 1% of all of the real estate out there, or 1% of all of the stocks in the stock market. We were talking about an asset class now, and I know Bitcoin is not the asset class, of course, but it makes up a large portion of it. And I believe over the long term, it's probably poised to absorb even more of that total crypto market cap. So we'll see what ends up happening. I don't see any problems with, like, the main figureheads, and I actually am rooting for Michael Saylor. I think he's brilliant. I think he's very smart. I think he should probably consult some traders on when he should begin to twop into Bitcoin next. But you know what? I'm rooting for him. So.
Great stuff, Max. Great stuff. I also brought up a Figital who requests to speak. I don't usually bring up people I haven't really interacted with, but I have interacted with Figital before. And Figital, welcome to the panel, man. Great to have you on the show for the first time. I believe we have interacted back on the roundtable spaces a couple of months back. But welcome, man. What do you got for us today, brother? Hope you're well.
Thanks, man. I am well. It's a beautiful day in LA. Yeah, we've interacted on the roundtable show, and I actually just started hosting. I won't show, but I just started hosting with Whalecoin Talk this morning. Had some really good Bitcoin talks, in general crypto markets. I had some thoughts. So, what position has BlackRock already taken in Bitcoin already? Was it? I don't want to make it up. It was a very large sum, right? Them and JP, or Bank of America, took a very large position since the start of the year. Is that correct?
Yeah, BlackRock did partner up with Coinbase, and they're going to be helping each other out when it comes to the custodian solutions for an ETF. So,
I'm under the impression they took. I thought they put like 147,000 Bitcoin or something like that, or 147 mil on their books.
Yeah, as far as like JP Morgan, I think they've been in the industry since like 2016, back when the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance got formed. But continue, brother.
Oh, so I'm just trying to figure out, in terms of gauging what the impact's going to be on at least acquisition of Bitcoin once the inevitable ETF is approved. I guess I had two questions. One, do we think that they're going to use their existing holdings to offer out to their constituents or their users? Or do you think they're going to acquire a bunch more for their spot ETF? And the other question I had was, does anybody know what the clarifications that the SEC is requiring with regards to their filings that they've been requesting for lack of satisfaction thus far in their ETF filings to date?
Yeah, so on my end, for your first question, I think you're just going to see like a pretty heavy spot bid for Bitcoin when it does get approved. So, like what we saw, say when CZ, he was swapping $1 billion of his assets onto Bitcoin, and we saw Bitcoin run from like just under 20K all the way to 31. I think we're going to see something like that, but it's going to be 20, 30x the power, right? And although I do still think we'll see that volatility, I think like all those dips would be eaten up a lot quicker, right? And we've kind of seen that activity lately, right? We sprung from 24 to almost 32 in a matter of days. So I think like that spot ETF would bring that buying activity. And as far as like your second question goes, I'm not a lawyer or anything like that, brother, but I personally think they're just going to drag this out up into the halving, if I'm being quite honest, right? And that's how these things tend to play out, right? Like MicroStrategy, right? The first publicly traded company to add Bitcoin to their books, being a publicly traded company in the US. That was done, shortly after the halving, right? So I think we're going to see the same thing with the ETF, where could be a little bit before the halving, could be a little bit afterward, but those are my thoughts on your two questions. Will, what are your thoughts on it, brother?
I think what he was asking is like what amount has, because BlackRock's already made purchases. That's basically what he was trying to state. The amount's 383 million. So that's how much they have on the books for Bitcoin already.
So more than double what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, it's 383 million for Bitcoin that they already have already. And if we get bids into the ETF, I would assume that if the ETF is known to be approved, which I think BlackRock would know before the general public would know, you'll probably see some moves on BlackRock as far as accumulating more prior to the public knowing and the public pushing that price up, then probably taking profit and then kind of running the market up from there. So we'll see how it plays out, but like that's kind of that portion. I didn't catch your second question there though, Fidgetal. If you could
No
repeat.
problem, and that makes sense, right? So I was wondering, my guess is that so their filings have been deficient thus far. The SEC has asked for further documentation or explanations to approve the ETF filings. So as to the first part that you said,
About in there, mate. I just want to give you an update.
oh, of course, I'm done.
All right. So actually they refiled and they were accepted. This was a day ago, so this is yesterday. The basis of their refiling was actually quite clever on the side of the actual SEC. So what happened is the SEC has filed them and has affirmed and confirmed their filing on the basis of them being accepted as a surveillance program level stock exchange. So they are actually being surveillanced as a pretty much beta for this sort of ETF processing on a normal generalized basis. So they were only accepted under the condition that they are being used as a beta process for looking at the general levels of legality regarding the exchange process on a ETF with this level. And the basis is they were accepted for the exact same rate, which is, I think you mentioned it. It's the basis of the overall management is BlackRock is trying to accrue a overall management of over 9.2 billion US dollars worth of Bitcoin in the general exchange. So that's kind of what they are on applying now, and they've got about 15 or 16 different ETF set up around that basis. So the funny thing is that they've been accepted obviously due to their size, due to what they are. There's no stopping what they're actually going to implement, but their acceptance is truly based on the factors of them supplying every single piece of information about their dividends, their successes, their losses to the SEC to actually create a system to lawfully create boundaries around the ETFs on cryptocurrency.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Sorry. Also, Fidgetal. Most of that amount I told you, it is in Bitcoin, but it's through companies that dabble with Bitcoin, if that makes sense. So it's not directly through BlackRock per se, but it's through investments that BlackRock has made through other companies, if that makes sense.
It does. Gotcha.
But yeah, that's that. I guess that would be my perspective on what they're doing right now. Yeah, it's interesting. I think with the SEC conversation too, this is normal. The SEC's always going to come back and deny the initial.
We gotta take a sec and just say the SEC, man. We gotta take a sec and take a sec back, and we gotta pay Gary Gensler his respect, man. I mean, he's protecting us, bro. He's protecting us and leading the charge for a way to keep up with the competition, right? You got to find any way to keep up with the competition and regulate and distribute fair market conditions and provide ample liquidity to all market participants in a very fair manner. So continue with what you were saying, Will.
No, what I was saying is they do this with most positions, right? They come in, you approach them with an ETF, spot, whatever. They always deny the first time. Say come back and give us a better, better outlook on what you're trying to do here, and then you'll come in, you'll redo it again. The point is like, and this is one thing that I consistently try to tell people: if they're dead set on doing this, they can get denied 10, 20 times. They can just keep filing. It doesn't matter. Like, eventually the SEC will get annoyed, and at a certain point they have to accept defeat, because if the SEC asks you to do something and you continue to build out the infrastructure of what they're looking for, to be able to make this happen, which BlackRock has the funds and allocations to be able to do that. Not a lot of companies do, and I think this was one of the failures on Grayscale's part specifically, because I think it was a lack of funds for Grayscale, because Grayscale could have easily kept doing it, right? And because you can be denied 1,000 times. It costs you to file, yes. It will cost you to go back and re-look at what you filed, and try and reword it. Just think of it like going in front of a judge, and you go in for a claim and the judge denies your claim. Well, you can go back and you can rebuttal that as many times as you want, and you can keep on going at it until the judge eventually approves it, in a way that fits what they're looking for. But they could definitely get this done. I think it's just a matter of, I think, time, and I think people think this is going to be faster than what it's going to be, and I think it will just take longer. Right? It'll take a little bit longer for them to get the spot, but I think that they're definitely dead set on this. The fact that they've made positions into Bitcoin tells me that they're dead set on making this happen one way or another.
All right, cool. All right, guys, unfortunately we do have to wrap up. So want to thank everyone here on the speaker panel. I want to thank Eleanor once again for coming on up and interacting with us. Looking forward to hosting her on our show in the future. And as a surprise for you guys, tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we will be hosting Ben Cowan from Into the Cryptoverse here live on Twitter Spaces. So look forward to that. We're also going to have other speakers participating on the panel. And if you guys enjoyed this conversation, feel free to follow us here at BecauseBitcoin. My name is Wabi. I usually speak on these spaces through the BB handle. If you guys enjoyed this conversation, feel free to follow us here because Bitcoin. Feel free to follow everyone up here on the panel. And shout out once again to Max, Tucker, Snorlax, Will for participating on these panels each and every day. And, we also are doing some more YouTube content. So look forward to that as well. We do have some live streams coming up with you guys with some pretty big guests. And if you guys enjoy real-time market updates across all financial markets, feel free to turn on bell notifications. We're always tweeting out things that happen out in the market in real time throughout the day, each and every day, 24/7 around the clock. And we also produce these Twitter spaces for you guys. And if you feel like supporting us, feel free to check out some of our premium links. You can go ahead and check out our links to our newsletter and our Discord, and feel free to check out our website so you can go ahead and try out our premium services for a week. And we'll see you all tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And want to send us off over to Max. Max, if you want to send us off, man, stage is all yours, brother.
Yeah, sure thing, guys. Thanks for being here. This was a great space. I love talking about Bitcoin, and it's certainly interesting to see some of the larger scale potential integrations into your major multi-billion, if not multi-trillion-dollar institutions. And look, whatever happens. I don't think in the short term really much signal north or south of current price can be derived. I think that it's solid. It's a solid narrative, and I think that it's ultimately in the long term going to lead to trillions of dollars of money being onboarded into crypto, which I think really only helps the cause. And hopefully the people getting involved in the space don't attempt to do too much to encumber every individual's right to self-custody their own assets. That's really my main potential contention with some of these players getting into the space, is that I don't want it to become dominated, because truthfully, I love that the little guy has just as much of a say as the big guy right now, and I don't want any of the opportunity to be squandered by people that already have probably more than they know what to do with. But with that said, I appreciate everybody tuning in and listening. If you don't know who we are, like Wabi mentioned, we're BecauseBitcoin. We're a financial media company with a very heavy emphasis on digital assets, specifically Bitcoin. If you really enjoyed the space and you're like, wow, these guys are brilliant, give that giant button in our bio a click. Check out our website. We do have some premium services that we offer. We write premium reports with actionable insights on different things that we're watching in the market on a weekly basis. We also have a premium Discord, but that's really going to be more for active traders, guys that want basically hour by hour, if not even more than that, type of commentary and analysis, charts, insights, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we're active in that every single day. We actually do 2 private live calls every single day, one at the New York Open and one at the New York Close, just for premium Discord members. So all of that is available in our bio. So again, if you like the space, please consider giving us a follow. And if you really, really like the space, check out those premium services. I promise you won't be disappointed.
All right, guys, with that being said, we'll see you all tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with Ben Cowan. So thank you all so much. As Max said, feel free to smash that follow button and turn on bell notice. Really means the world to us, guys. And we look forward to creating an impact on the digital asset space for years to come. And definitely looking forward to the second half of the year. So go on ahead and smash the follow button. Go ahead and smash it up. Smash up those likes. Follow us for 10x gems, and we'll see you all tomorrow on the next show. I'm gonna go ahead and go to the gym and train some upper body, right? So I'm gonna do some seated dumbbell presses with no back support, some barbell shoulder presses with no back support, then some incline barbell bench presses, and then some lateral raises and some front raises, some lat pull downs, train some arms, and I'm going to put you on the spot, Tucker. You owe us a gym video, man. What's going on with that, bro? You got to
Hey,
post
it's
up your.
coming, Wabi. It's coming. Don't worry, brother. It's
You got to,
coming.
guys. If you guys don't know Tucker, he's actually 6'2", 260 pounds. Quite the monstrous freak. He is blessed with God-given genetics, and we want to see more of Tucker putting up some gym videos as I have. So you guys should follow Tucker as well. We need more people in Hagrid's army, right? And influence him to post more gym videos, man. Let's do this, bro. Let's get serious. But all right, but in all seriousness, guys, we're gonna go ahead and close up shop. Thank you all so much. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care, and God bless you all.